Do you recall from an earlier video segment I mentioned we're going to get back to basics? That's just what we're going to do in this segment. We are going to review some fundamental nutritional terminology by defining and describing the term macronutrient. It is important that you have a basic knowledge in order to know what you're eating and how it affects your ability to lose weight. It's also necessary for food analysis, which we will focus on intently as we go forward. I hear the term macronutrient all of the time, but what exactly does it mean? I often talk to people that have no clue what the word means, and more importantly, how the food represented by a specific macronutrient affects your waistline. If this is a review for you, consider it a brush up on nutritional terminology and just follow along. I am sure it's new information for many folks and want to make sure that everyone is on equal footing. Okay, here's the formal definition of a macronutrient. There are specific nutrients that the body uses in relatively large amounts. Proteins, carbohydrates, and fats are needed to ensure proper metabolic function. This is as opposed to micronutrients, which the body requires in smaller amounts, such as vitamins and minerals. Wow, that was a mouthful. In simple terms, basically all food can be categorized into three macronutrient components: fat, protein, and carbohydrate, and sometimes you'll see alcohol included because it supplies energy in the form of calories. The problem I see is that most people cannot identify the difference. I have to admit it can be a little confusing because many foods are a combination of fat, protein, and carbohydrate. I think the most effective way to approach this is going to be to identify foods that are predominantly either fat, protein, or carbs. Let's look at each category of macronutrient and show several images that accurately represent each group. Let's start with fat. I like to start with fat because high-fat foods are near and dear to my heart. I say this because my obesity as a kid was due to a very high-fat diet. Bacon fat specifically. My mom cooked everything in bacon fat. By the way, bacon fat is a pure saturated fat. This category of fat is bad for both your waistline and your heart. There are only a few other foods I can think of that are pure fat, and the rest are combinations of fat in either protein or carbohydrate or both. Pure forms of fat are foods like butter, oils, lard, shortening, and the one that I loved as a kid in addition to bacon fat was mayonnaise. There could be more, but let's look at a few images of foods that are considered high fat. It is really more realistic to be able to identify a combination of macronutrients like fat and protein instead of a pure one, because most foods are a combination, and this is what you're most likely to experience in everyday life. Examples include, but not limited to, fatty meat like bacon and fast food hamburger, pastries, French fries, cheese, ice cream, whole milk, nuts, donuts, some types of fish, avocado, potato chips, eggs, and the list goes on and on. These are all examples of high-fat foods that are a combination of macronutrients. It is important to note that not all fats are bad for you, but let's save the good fat, bad fat analysis for another segment. You might be thinking, I still have a hard time identifying the combinations of macronutrients. It's easy, but you must refer to the label on a food to determine its macronutrient composition. This is really important. If you are new to this game, the label found on almost all foods is the most important tool you have in identifying the macronutrient composition of a food. Your rebuttal might be that the food I'm trying to analyze doesn't have a label. Most foods have a label, but if they don't, say for example a donut that you purchased at the coffee shop, what do? You could Google it, do a little research, and find out what the ingredients are, or I'll bet if you search hard enough, you can find a label on it. Whole foods are a little bit more difficult, like an avocado. I Googled it and came up with this label. As you can see, It is a combination of all three macronutrients and very high in fat. When a label is not available, you must do a little work to determine the macronutrient makeup of a food. As a result of your effort, you will begin to develop a common sense about macronutrient composition. If you are diligent about reading labels, you'll begin to develop what I refer to as nutritional intuition about the makeup of a food. Okay, let's move on to protein. Protein can be categorized as either animal protein or plant protein. The list of foods that contain protein is long. To me, the easiest way to think of animal protein is to imagine beef, pork, fish, dairy foods, and poultry. Plant protein is found in beans, lentils, soy, and rice. There are a lot of other foods that contain either animal or plant protein and too numerous to list. Hopefully you're getting the idea. As with the fat, we'll save the more in-depth analysis of protein for another segment. Our objective in this segment is simply to identify it. Let's move on to carbohydrates. The carbohydrate we use as food come from the photosynthesis of plants and represent by far the largest group of macronutrients available. We as a culture consume carbohydrates, especially refined carbohydrates, until we are literally exploding. I like to break down carbohydrates into two distinct groups, refined and unrefined. Unrefined carbohydrates are foods that when cooked and consumed represent the food as it was in its natural state, like fruits, vegetables, beans, rice, and lentils. These foods are the most healthy and will help you in your weight loss endeavor. Refined carbohydrates, on the other hand, such as bread, cookies, beer, chips, pop, sugar, pasta, juice, wine, sports drinks, and crackers all hinder your weight loss. Ultimately, if you consume a lot of refined carbohydrates and sugar over the long haul, you increase your risk of both obesity and type 2 diabetes. The key is to be able to identify a carbohydrate and distinguish whether it is refined or unrefined. Being able to tell the difference will help you in making healthy carbohydrate choices. There you have it, Macronutrients 101. We could delve much deeper into the analysis of macronutrients and how they affect your metabolism, but for now, just work on being able to identify the difference. It's a great place to start. Remember, almost all foods have a label associated with them, and once you begin to read labels, your skill will increase and you'll be an old pro in no time.